What if I told you that one of the most dominant engines of the start of the season could be hiding much more than it seems? Because after the Australian Grand Prix, the tension within Formula One exploded in an unexpected way. The FIA has launched an investigation into the Mercedes engine after several teams detected power and energy deployment data that do not quite fit with what the regulations allow. But that's not the most serious thing. The really explosive thing is that some client teams of the German manufacturer itself are beginning to report that they do not receive all the technical information about the engine they use in their cars. This has opened a huge rift within the Mercedes family itself, because if these accusations are true, it would mean that some teams could be competing without fully knowing how the power unit they have in their car works. In a sport where every tenth is decided in microscopic details, not having full access to engine data can completely change a car's performance over an entire race weekend. Meanwhile, the FIA analyzes telemetries, reviews energy records, and tries to understand if everything is within the law, or if we are facing one of the biggest technical controversies in recent years in Formula One. So the question is inevitable: is Mercedes simply exploiting its technology better? Or is there really a hidden advantage that not even its own customer teams know about? Because what started as a simple race in Melbourne could now become a technical, political, and sporting conflict that threatens to completely shake the balance of the grid. It all started immediately after the Australian Grand Prix ended, a race that in theory should simply serve to confirm the competitive order at the start of the season. However, what seemed to be just another result on the calendar quickly became a red flag within the paddock. Engineers from several teams began to analyze public telemetries and performance data that can be reconstructed from race laps, and it was then that certain patterns appeared that did not quite fit with what many expected of the normal behavior of a power unit under the current regulations. The analyses showed very specific moments in which the Mercedes engine seemed to deliver especially strong acceleration peaks at the exit of slow corners, accompanied by an ability to maintain top speeds for more meters of straight line than most of its rivals. This, in itself, does not prove anything illegal at all, but it was enough to arouse the curiosity of several rival technical departments that began to study what happened in Melbourne in more detail. In modern Formula One, every tenth is studied to the millimeter, and that is why rival engineers began to review something very specific: the deployment pattern of the hybrid system of the Mercedes engine. The regulations set clear limits on the amount of electrical energy that can be recovered and used during a lap, meaning that all teams are working within relatively similar margins in terms of hybrid power. But in the analyses after the Grand Prix, some specialists detected that the behavior of the German engine seemed to maintain extremely high energy efficiency for longer than expected. In other words, the car seemed to accelerate with very constant force even in phases where, theoretically, the available electrical energy should be reducing. That type of detail was what caused suspicions to begin to circulate quickly within the paddock. From that moment on, the situation began to escalate within the championship. The FIA, which constantly receives technical information from the teams and analyzes the performance data of each power unit, decided to increase the level of monitoring of the Mercedes engine. This does not automatically mean that there is a violation, but it does imply that the regulatory body wants to review certain parameters of the hybrid system, energy management, and the thermal behavior of the engine in greater depth. Federation technicians have requested additional access to certain operating records to verify that the power deployment and energy efficiency observed during the race are completely within what is permitted by the technical regulations. In these types of situations, the FIA usually acts with extreme caution, because many times the apparent technical advantages end up simply being more efficient engineering solutions within legal limits. But while the technical investigation began to take shape, in parallel another problem began to arise that raised the tension even more: the relationship between Mercedes and the teams that use its engines. Within the paddock, comments began to circulate that some customer teams were not receiving all the complete data on the operation of the power unit. This type of information is absolutely key to preparing for a race weekend, as teams use extremely complex simulation models that depend on knowing precisely how the engine will behave in different track situations. If that data is not completely transparent, engineers are forced to work virtually blind on certain aspects of the car's performance. It was precisely at that point when the controversy stopped being just a technical issue and also became a political problem within the championship. Some teams began to wonder whether the official Mercedes team could be handling much more detailed information about their own power unit than what they share with their customers. And in a sport where simulations, energy strategy, and engine management during the race can make the difference between winning or losing several positions, this possible difference in information generated a climate of mistrust within Mercedes' own ecosystem. What began as a simple performance analysis following the Australian Grand Prix was quickly evolving into a much deeper conflict, one that could end up affecting not only the FIA's technical investigation, but also the internal balance between manufacturers and customer teams within Formula One. The problem really began to escalate when Mercedes customer teams began to take a closer look at what had happened during the Australian Grand Prix and in the days following the race. In modern Formula One, each team carries out extremely precise simulations before taking to the track. These simulations are based on thousands of technical parameters including aerodynamics, tire degradation, chassis behavior, and of course, the detailed operation of the power unit. But for those models to work correctly, teams need to have full access to the technical data of the engine they use. And it was precisely at that point where some teams began to feel that something was not right. Because when they compared their simulations with what was really happening on the track, they detected differences that were too large to be simply a matter of the car's configuration or the driver's driving style. One of the teams that showed the most discomfort with this situation was McLaren, a historical partner of Mercedes and one of the German manufacturer's most important clients. Comments began to emerge from within the British team about the difficulty they were having in predicting the exact behavior of the engine in certain phases of the lap. According to these complaints, engineers were sometimes forced to go out on the track, collect real data, and then adjust their simulations afterwards, rather than being able to accurately anticipate engine performance before the start of the race weekend. In such a competitive championship, this difference in the quality of information can have enormous consequences, because it limits the team's ability to optimize the car from the first moment. This situation raised a very uncomfortable question within the paddock. Are the customer teams receiving exactly the same level of information as the official Mercedes team? Technically, the regulation requires engine manufacturers to provide the same hardware specifications to all their customers, but the exchange of detailed technical information can be much more complex. The official team works directly with the engineers developing the engine, which naturally gives them a much deeper knowledge of how to squeeze every little detail out of the hybrid system, how to manage the electrical energy at different times of the race, and how to adapt the engine's behavior to different track conditions. If customers do not have access to all that data with the same level of accuracy, their ability to compete on a level playing field may suffer. The situation has now reached an extremely delicate point for Mercedes, because the investigation initiated by the FIA could have several consequences depending on what the regulatory body's technicians discover. The Federation is currently reviewing in great detail the operating records of the power unit used during the Australian Grand Prix, analyzing variables such as the deployment of electrical energy, energy recovery levels, the thermal efficiency of the engine, and the way in which power is delivered at different times of the lap. These types of audits are not uncommon within Formula One, but when they are carried out after a specific race and coincide with suspicions within the paddock, the level of pressure on the manufacturer increases considerably. The important thing here is that the FIA is not only looking to see if the engine is illegal, but also to see if there is some interpretation of the regulations that Mercedes is exploiting in a way that other teams have not yet understood or been able to replicate. If the regulatory body concludes that everything is within the law, the situation could be closed simply with a technical clarification of the regulations, something that has happened many times in the recent history of Formula One. In that case, Mercedes would emerge stronger because it would demonstrate that it has found a more efficient way of working within the rules, which would force the rest of the manufacturers to try to copy or adapt that solution as quickly as possible. However, even in that scenario, the controversy would not completely disappear, because the political problem between the German manufacturer and its client teams would still be present. The mistrust that has begun to build within that relationship could take a long time to dissipate, especially if teams feel they are not receiving the same level of technical transparency as the official team. But there is also a much more delicate scenario. If the FIA detects that the engine's behavior is taking advantage of a gray area in the regulations or a technical gap in the regulations, the Federation could introduce a technical directive to limit or clarify that practice. This would not necessarily imply a direct sanction, but it could force Mercedes to modify the way it manages its hybrid system or its energy architecture during races. In modern Formula One, these types of decisions can completely change the competitive balance between teams, because a small modification in engine operation can directly affect the car's performance in acceleration, energy consumption, and top speed. At this time, the situation remains open. The FIA continues to review data, monitor technical parameters, and evaluate whether the engine's behavior perfectly complies with what the regulations establish. It may all end up being just a brilliant engineering solution that Mercedes has managed to develop ahead of its rivals. But there is also the possibility that this research will lead to technical clarifications or even changes in the way certain aspects of the hybrid system are managed. In any case, what is already evident is that technological dominance in Formula One always generates questions, suspicions, and pressure from the rest of the paddock. However, the most delicate point may not only be in the FIA investigation, but in the relationship between Mercedes and the teams that depend on its engine to compete. In a championship where access to technical information can make the difference between fighting for victories or being trapped in the middle of the grid, any sense of inequality in the flow of data can cause internal tensions that are difficult to manage. And if that distrust continues to grow, the impact could go far beyond a simple technical controversy, even affecting the way teams choose their engine suppliers in the future. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.